under a luminous full moon that cast silver light upon the shattered ice and barren tundra. The remote Arctic region stirred with unease. Once, these lands had been ruled by the relentless beauty of ice and snow. But now the warming of the climate had dissolved the vast sheets of perennial frost into treacherous cracks and drifting fragments. In this transformed, post-apocalyptic wilderness, fate had gathered together three forces as disparate as they were monstrous. A small group of unwary tourists, lost on a fateful expedition, wandered unknowingly into the heart of an unfolding nightmare. At the edge of a windswept coastal forest near what remained of an ancient shoreline, a rare congregation of polar bears had appeared, drawn by the unexpected bounty of a beached carcass and the lingering echoes of plentiful prey. 4 or 5 mighty animals, powerful yet gaunt from hunger, were engaged in their delicate, instinctive contest over the spoils. Their roars and heavy footsteps shook the fragile ice, and for a moment, even the relentless Arctic seemed to hold its breath in solemn respect for these titans of the wild. Yet the tranquility of that moment was an illusion. Hidden in the depths of the pine-shrouded forest, the Wendigo lurked like a cursed memory awakened. This malevolent spirit, haunted by legends of ancient indigenous lore and notorious for its ability to absorb the life force of its victims, had long slumbered in darkness. Now, driven by an unquenchable hunger and stirred by the scent of fresh blood and decaying flesh, the Wendigo slithered forth, its gaunt, emaciated form barely visible amid the tangled underbrush. Every step it took exuded a cold malice, a promise that nothing in this frozen realm would remain unchallenged. As if summoned by the same lunar light that bathed the tundra in ethereal radiance, another formidable presence stirred from an even deeper myth, the werewolf. Or lichen, a human cursed by lunar magic to transform on nights of the full moon. In this brutal age of environmental collapse, a lone figure roamed the margins between civilization and wilderness. A being who had once been human now bore the scars and savagery of a beast. With eyes alight in a feral gleam and muscles coiled as though primed for an ancient hunt, the werewolf emerged from the shadows of an abandoned, ruined settlement. Its form was both terrifying and strangely tragic, a living testament to the human curse of uncontrollable hunger and violence. Fueled by the chaotic energy of a changed world, it was on this night, under an uncompromisingly brilliant moon, that fate forced these three forces into a perilous collision. The tourists, confused, terrified, and desperate for a path of escape, found themselves caught in the midst of a primal war. They stumbled through the snow, their hearts pounding in their chests, as the ambient sounds of nature gave way to the roars of beasts and guttural cries of unearthly malice. In the open area where the polar bears had gathered, an uneasy standoff had been forming. The Wendigo's measured approach disrupted the subtle balance between the bears themselves. These creatures, though often competitive over scarce resources, had maintained a temporary truce in the face of nature's harsh demands. But as the Wendigo advanced, its eyes a burning ember of hunger, it targeted the smallest, most vulnerable among them. In a flash of savage intent, the cursed entity lunged toward a young cub that had strayed from the congregation, its elongated claws slicing through the cold air. The cub's terrified cries shattered the low murmur of the assembled bears. The polar bears, inheritors of the wild's ancient power, reacted with a speed that defied their now gaunt bodies. With roars that trembled the very ice beneath their padded feet, they surged forth, each powerful limb a testament to their once regal might. In that chaotic moment, the Wendigo's focus shifted from the lone prey to the assembled fury of the bear pack. Yet before the unified onslaught could settle, a haunting howl cut through the night, a cry that heralded the arrival of the werewolf. The transformed human, compelled by the full moon's insane allure and driven by an instinct both primal and tragic, appeared on the periphery of the battlefield. Its presence was electric, a juxtaposition of human intellect and savage ferocity. The werewolf, its fur mottled with wild, unpredictable hues and its eyes glinting with a mixture of torment and desire for blood, darted into the fray with terrifying agility. The ensuing melee was an otherworldly conflagration of fury and chaos. The Wendigo, a creature of both spectral cunning and absorbed strength, darted among its adversaries. It slashed at both the polar bears and the werewolf with relentless, inhuman speed, its claws leaving trails of crimson on the snow. The polar bears, normally solitary and indifferent to human affairs, exhibited an extraordinary unity, driving their massive forms in coordinated strikes as their roars reverberated like ancient battle hymns. At the same time, the werewolf, torn between its lingering vestiges of humanity and the overwhelming pulse of its beastly nature, leapt with savage grace, swiping its razor-sharp claws at the encroaching spirit of the Wendigo. In the midst of this spectral trinity, the tourists, terrified witnesses to the primal clash, sought refuge in a nearby ice cave. The cavern's frosted walls offered a brief haven from the onslaught, where terrified eyes peered out at the spectacle of ferocity unfolding just beyond the threshold of darkness and light. Their fearful murmurs and stifled cries became the only human testament to the confrontation. A distant echo amid the sounds of snapping ice and clashing roars. The battle surged onward as the Wendigo traded blows with both the bear pack and the werewolf. The creature's lithe, spectral form allowed it to glide between moments of savage assault and its own desperate retreats. Its presence a dark reminder that ancient curses rarely die, they mutate, absorb, and re-emerge stronger. One polar bear, larger and seemingly wiser with the weight of countless seasons on its scarred hide, managed a tremendous leap that swept the Wendigo off balance. Its jaws clamped down on a limb of the cursed entity, and for an agonizing instant, the Wendigo's roar of defiance merged with the triumphant bellow of the bear. Simultaneously, the werewolf, with a snarl that combined both human anguish and beastly fury, lunged at the Wendigo from another angle, its claws rending at that dark heart. For long, the battlefield simmered with the intensity of clashing titans. The Wendigo's stolen strength, borrowed from fallen polar bears and fueled by the bitter legacy of human excess, seemed to ebb and flow as if measured in pulses of raw, spectral energy. The polar bears, despite their gaunt frames and palpable hunger, fought with the instinctual unity of a species that had long been the sovereigns of this frozen dominion. And the werewolf, while caught in the throes of a transformation that was as much curse as it was tragic destiny, displayed a ferocity that challenged both nature and myth. As the full moon reached its zenith, bathing the entire expanse in an unearthly, silver glow, the dynamic of the battle began to shift. In a moment of near transcendental brutality, the Wendigo found itself beset on all sides by the united force of the polar bear pack and the relentless, savage strikes of the werewolf. The creature's eyes flickered with a malevolent light, its spectral form quivering as the harsh reality of its predicament settled in. With one final, desperate surge, a wild, almost resigned roar that cascaded over the tundra, the Wendigo recoiled. Its form, battered by the converging might of nature's champions, staggered backward, fading into the dark fringes of the forest as if swallowed by the very shadows from which it had emerged. For an endless moment, the silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a mix of sorrow and fierce triumph. The polar bears, their mighty forms silhouetted against the radiant full moon, gathered in a protective circle around their injured kin and the trembling remains of the lost cub. The werewolf, now caught in the last throes of its lupine transformation as the moon's power waned, stood motionless amid the chaos, a figure straddling the line between human memory and beastly instinct. The tourists huddled in the cave, hearts pounding in empathetic terror and awe at the spectacle that had rewritten the natural order before their very eyes. Then, as the moon began its slow descent beyond the horizon and its silvery glow faded into the soft light of a new Arctic dawn, a profound calm descended upon the battlefield. The Wendigo, its malevolent energy diminished for now, melted back into the dark recesses of the forest, leaving behind an ambiguous promise of eventual resurgence. The polar bears, their unity having briefly defied the ancient curse, resumed their quiet, solemn procession over the ice, tending to their wounded and comforting each other in the aftermath of the tumult. The werewolf, its features slowly reverting to a more human semblance as its curse lessened with the waning moon, disappeared into the thawing shadows, a bittersweet echo of the duality that had defined its existence. In the fragile silence that followed, the survivors, both human and beast, found themselves faced with a choice that resonated in every beating heart, a choice between renewal and despair. The tourists, now forever marked by the night's fierce collision of legends, would carry with them a haunting memory of a world where the boundaries between myth and reality had crumbled. The indigenous voices that had long warned of the deep, abiding curses born of greed and disregard for nature now echoed with new urgency. They proclaimed that unless humanity learned to honor the delicate balance of the natural world, such nightmarish events would continue to haunt the frozen wasteland. And so, beneath the expanse of a sky that bore the soft promise of a new day yet shivered with lingering twilight's cold breath, the saga of Polar Bear vs. Wendigo and Werewolf reached its final, open-ended crescendo. The polar bear pack's triumphant, if temporary, unity had repelled the cursed Wendigo and forced the werewolf to retreat into the uncertain folds of its fading curse. Yet in that victory lay an ominous, lingering question. Was the ancient curse truly vanquished? Or was it merely compelled to withdraw, awaiting the next opportunity to rise when mankind's greed once again unleashed chaos upon the earth? As the survivors dispersed into the vast, endless Arctic, each step echoing the timeless struggle between light and darkness, a haunting truth settled over the land. Nature's resilience, though formidable, was forever intertwined with the ever-present shadow of old, undying curses. In that final moment, as the sun's first pale rays stretched over the horizon, the murmurs of the wind seemed to carry a solemn warning across the ice, a warning that as long as humanity persisted with its destructive ways, the spectral forces of the past would never truly fade away. Under the silvery gleam of a full moon that bathed the frozen landscape in an ethereal glow, the initial shock of the Wendigo's predatory strike had shattered the brief calm among the gathered polar bears. In the moments following the savage attack on the vulnerable cub, the atmosphere grew electric with tension and terror. The Wendigo, its emaciated form contorted with malevolent hunger, had slithered through the peripheral darkness to seize the moment. Its spectral claws, glinting like shards of fractured ice, tore into the air as it lunged once more, this time seeking out any isolated target among the pack. The polar bears, normally solitary and fiercely independent creatures, found themselves inexplicably united in a desperate bid to defend their own. Their roars, deep and resonant, mingled with the guttural, unearthly cries of the cursed entity as the boundaries between natural rivalry and collective survival began to blur. Amid the chaos, the piercing howl of the werewolf cut sharply through the clamorous night, a sound both haunting and primal. Drawn by the brilliance of the full moon and the feral energy that now roiled unrestrained across the icy expanse, the werewolf emerged from the shadows of a dilapidated coastal outpost. Once human, now caught in the throes of curse and transformation, its lupine form carried the flickering scars of a tortured past. Muscles rippled beneath its matted fur as it padded into the fray with an agility that was both graceful and terrifying, its eyes burning with a mix of animalistic rage and tragic sorrow. The beast's entry added a chaotic new dimension to the struggle. Here was a creature bound to the cycle of the moon, neither wholly man nor fully beast, drawn to the same bloodlust that animated the Wendigo but driven by instincts that sometimes recalled a fleeting, desperate humanity. The conflict soon escalated into a tumultuous triadic melee. On one side, the Wendigo advanced with spectral speed and a predatory precision honed by ancient malediction, its form shifting in the pale light like dark smoke on the wind. On another, the polar bears, emboldened by their instinctive need to protect each other, and now spurred by a rare surge of collective unity, began to encircle the intruder. Their massive paws pounded the fragile ice, their crushing bites and determined, synchronized charges turned the already uneasy silence of the Arctic into a relentless cacophony of roars, snarls, and the eerie clang of breaking ice. Meanwhile, the werewolf, oscillating on the edge between the human mind it had once possessed and the uncontrollable beast it now embodied, darted in and out with a savage ferocity. Its every lunge was unpredictable, a flurry of twisted claws and rapid, lethal strikes, seeking to exploit every moment of weakness in its spectral adversary. As the three forces converged, the battlefield became a shifting tapestry of light and dark. The polished snow glittered like shattered glass beneath the relentless assault, while shadows danced in erratic patterns cast by the brilliant full moon. The Wendigo's unnatural gait, part creeping dread and part predatory fluidity, contrasted starkly with the ground-shaking might of the polar bears and the erratic, savage energy of the werewolf. In one fleeting moment, a wounded cub cried out from the protective midst of its kin, a sound of pure, unfiltered terror that resonated in the hearts of all who heard it. The polar bears responded immediately, their furious roars a unified declaration that no member of their kin would be left to suffer alone. With an almost instinctive coordination rarely seen among wild creatures, two mature bears surged toward the assailant, their powerful limbs driving them in a converging motion as if guided by a single, resolute purpose. The werewolf, sensing its moment to turn the tide, launched itself from a hidden vantage point along the periphery, its eyes, glinting with a mixture of ferocity and tragic resignation, locked onto the Wendigo with a predatory intensity that spoke of deep, internal conflict. In the ensuing moments, the spectral predator and the tormented werewolf clashed in a flurry of balletic violence, claws and fangs meeting in a struggle that blurred the line between myth and raw, unbridled nature. The Wendigo, though unerringly swift and possessed of a supernatural cunning, found that even its otherworldly agility was no match for the combined onslaught of ancient polar might and the ferocious, unbalanced power of the werewolf. Every snarl and every snapping bite resonated like a challenge to the dark forces that had long lain dormant in the memory of the frozen wild. Throughout the battle, the polar bears exhibited moments of breathtaking unity. Their coordinated roars and aggressive charges transformed what had once been solitary hunts into an emergent defense mechanism of communal strength. As the Wendigo attempted to flee into the shadowed veil of the surrounding forest, the bears, with a rare blend of cooperation and instinct, pressed the attack. The werewolf, half a whisper of a human past and fully a creature of the cursed night, joined in this chorus of retribution, ensuring that the spectral entity would not simply vanish but be driven back into the depths of its ancient lair. Yet amid the fury and chaos, the human witnesses, lost tourists inadvertently caught in the maelstrom, gathered in terror within the relative safety of a nearby ice cave. Their terrified cries and the muffled sounds of battle were carried on the wind, a haunting backdrop to a conflict that transcended the ordinary. In that desperate, surreal moment, as beams of moonlight illuminated the splintered ice and bloodied paw prints marked the scene like cryptic runes of warning, the world seemed to hold its breath. The battle waged on for an eternity of heartbeats. The Wendigo's chilling shrieks, echoing with ancient malice, were met with the polar bear's unyielding defiance and the werewolf's tortured, intermittent roars, a triadic struggle that encapsulated the eternal conflict between nature's raw, elemental forces and the dark echoes of human sin and despair. And in this maelstrom of primal energy, every fractured shard of ice, every glistening pool of melting snow, bore silent witness to an unspoken truth, that the balance of life, no matter how disrupted, depended on unlikely alliances forged in moments of shared calamity. As the full moon slowly reached the zenith of its celestial path, casting an almost surreal, silver glow across the battlefield, a moment of decisive action crystallized. One of the elder polar bears, its form both majestic and gravely wounded by the relentless onslaught, broke from the encircling pack in a determined charge that sent shockwaves through the frozen ground. With a cry that was at once a lament for lost vitality and a defiant roar echoing the ancient heartbeat of the Arctic, it leapt toward the Wendigo. The beast, taken aback by the sudden, overwhelming force of nature's might, faltered in its assault. Simultaneously, the werewolf surged from another direction, driven by its own inner turmoil, its savage claws lashing out in a blistering crescendo. The convergence was as explosive as it was brief, a wild, uncontrolled explosion of fury and defiance that left the Wendigo's form staggering under the weight of the combined assault. In the critical moments that followed, the chaos of the encounter intensified until it seemed that time itself had begun to fracture. The polar bear's ferocious unity and the werewolf's unrelenting assault drove the Wendigo toward a narrow escape route, a dark corridor beyond the tree line where shadows pooled thickly in the cold. But before it could vanish into that abyss, the unified force of nature encircled the cursed creature in a final, devastating charge. The Wendigo's thrashing became erratic, its spectral light dimming as the convergence of relentless roars and savage strikes overwhelmed its dark essence. In that moment of agonizing climax, the creature let out one final, harrowing scream, an unearthly cry that carried both the pain of millennia and the defiant resistance of a curse unleashed, and retreated as quickly as it had appeared. Swallowed up by the dense woods and the unyielding, icy silence. As the battle subsided, the polar bears gathered once again, their massive forms huddling protectively around the injured and the young. The werewolf, its features flickering between beast and fleeting humanity, slowly receded into the snowy periphery, its fate forever bound to the cyclical curse of the full moon. The chaos that had erupted under the luminous watch of the moon gradually waned into a heavy, reflective quiet, punctuated by the labored breaths and mournful roars of animals and the whispered murmurs of human survivors hiding within the ice cave. Though victory over the intruding Wendigo in this tumultuous clash seemed to belong to nature's warriors for the night, a lingering question hung heavily in the cold Arctic air. Had the ancient curse been repelled in full? Or had it merely retreated to bide its time, waiting, as all dark forces do, for the moment when human greed and chaos would once again disturb the fragile balance of this crumbling world? Thus, beneath the unwavering radiance of the full moon and the dawning promise of an uncertain new day, the battlefield lay strewn with scars both visible and hidden. The polar bear pack, in a rare and brief instance of collective unity, had repelled the vicious assault, and the werewolf, its curse receding with the waning lunar energy, faded into the night. Yet the echo of that fierce, primordial battle, where myth collided with nature in a struggle for survival, left an indelible mark upon the frozen wilderness, a somber reminder that as long as the human heart beats with greed and neglect, ancient curses may rise again from the shadows. Under a sky ablaze with the luminous glow of the full moon, the frozen battlefield trembled with the raw energy of nature's defiance and ancient curses reborn. The air, crisp and unnervingly still, pulsed with an almost tangible tension as if the very fabric of the Arctic awaited a final verdict. The polar bear pack, united in an unprecedented display of communal instinct, formed a formidable circle around the wounded cubs and their injured elders. Each powerful bear, despite the hardships of hunger and the ravages of a broken world, exuded an aura of primordial strength, eyes glinting with ancestral memories of endless nights and fierce winters. Their synchronized roars, deep and resonant, reverberated over the ice, sounding like a chorus of ancient warriors calling out against the darkness. At the edge of this encircling formation, the Wendigo emerged from the inky shadows of the taiga, a creature whose cursed form had been twisted by centuries of malediction. Its gaunt figure, shrouded in spectral mist, moved with an eerie, fluid grace, as though it belonged not fully to this realm but to a forgotten, shadowed memory of existence. The creature's eyes, burning with an unholy crimson light, scanned the battlefield with a predatory hunger that had been magnified by the stolen essence of a fallen polar bear. Each step it took left haunting claw marks in the fragile ice, and every unearthly cry echoed like a lamentation for an era long past. Amid the tumult, a solitary howl split the air, a piercing sound that announced the arrival of the werewolf. Once human, now cursed to transform under the dominating power of the full moon. The werewolf emerged from the fringes of a derelict coastal outpost, its feral visage, framed by unruly, matted fur and eyes reflecting both human torment and beastly fury, added another layer of chaos to the unfolding epic. The creature, driven by instincts older than man and conflicted by the lingering echoes of its lost humanity, bounded into the fray with swift, predatory urgency. Its every movement carried the duality of savage power and tragic vulnerability, as if it were battling not just an external foe but the curse that had twisted its very soul. For what seemed like an eternity under the unyielding glow of the full moon, the three forces clashed in a symphony of terror and fury. The Wendigo, cunning, spectral, and driven by an unquenchable hunger, darted among its adversaries, its body contorting in unnatural ways as it sought to tear asunder the living essence of any creature it encountered. The polar bears, despite their normally solitary nature, acted with an extraordinary unity. Their massive, powerful bodies moved in tandem, One bear would advance with a fearsome charge while another flanked the creature from the side. And still another roared to distract and disorient the cursed fiend. In a series of brutal, bone-crushing collisions, their enormous jaws and taloned paws met the Wendigo's lashing, ethereal claws, each impact resonating like a note in an ancient war hymn. The werewolf, caught in the midst of this primordial struggle, alternated between moments of wild savagery and sudden, almost reflective pauses, its eyes often flickering with the faint glimmer of lost human empathy before hardening once more into the cold, unyielding gaze of the beast. It leapt from behind jagged outcrops of ice, its claws slashing viciously at the spectral attacker, its howls merging with those of the bears into a discordant chorus that shook the very ground. In one heart-stopping moment, the Wendigo seemed to gain the upper hand, its slender, agile form darting rapidly to seize a young bear that had strayed briefly from the defensive circle. A terrified roar split the silence as the polar bears surged forth, their unity crystallizing into a single, unstoppable force. The clash grew ever more ferocious as the full moon reached its zenith. Under the baleful light, the ice beneath them, already weakened by the relentless effects of a warming world, began to shudder. Every savage blow sent ripples of fracture across the surface. Every roar and cry echoed with the agony of ancient grudges being repaid. The polar bear's unity was both awe-inspiring and desperate, an elemental stand against a curse that was as old as time itself. The werewolf, its dual nature teetering on the edge of transformation, intensified its assault, darting in unpredictable arcs, its every lunge a manifestation of both calculated strategy and wild, uncontrolled rage. Then came the crescendo of the melee, a moment so charged with raw, unfettered energy that time itself appeared to fracture. With one tremendous, unified charge, the polar bears advanced in perfect synchrony, their massive forms colliding with the Wendigo in a final, all-consuming blow. The creature let out a deafening, spectral shriek, a sound that mingled with the roar of the bears and the anguished howl of the werewolf, creating a cacophony that seemed to tear at the very heart of the night. In that instant, the foundation of the battlefield, the fragile ice upon which they fought, began to break apart under the combined force of primal might and ancient malediction. Crackling sounds crescendoed into a deafening roar as fissures snaked their way across the ice like scars on a once unblemished surface. With an explosive finality, the ice shattered, in a cascade of glittering fragments and freezing spray. The polar bears, the Wendigo, and the werewolf were all thrown into a swirling chaos, a tumultuous plunge into the cold, indifferent embrace of the Arctic waters below. For several heartbeats, the world was a maelstrom of roaring water, shattered ice, and desperate, chaotic energy, the boundaries between land and sea, life and death, myth and reality, blurred into a single, harrowing moment of suspended fate. When the violent tumult finally subsided, the remnants of the battle lay scattered across a desolate, ice-covered seascape. The polar bear pack, though battered and diminished, emerged from the watery chaos, their eyes carrying the heavy burden of survival and an unspoken vow to protect what remained of their kind. The werewolf, its transformation ebbing with the waning lunar power, slowly retreated into the far reaches of the ice, its fate uncertain and its inner struggle unresolved. And the Wendigo, its once menacing form now reduced to a series of fading, spectral echoes, had vanished, leaving behind only the chilling promise of its eventual return, like a dark omen lingering on the edge of consciousness. In the aftermath of the final confrontation, a profound silence settled upon the ruined battlefield. The few human witnesses, tourists and indigenous survivors alike, gathered in a nearby ice cave, their voices hushed and their eyes brimming with both relief and terror. Within the cave's dim sanctuary, elders recounted the events in hushed tones, their words a solemn reminder of nature's raw power and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. They warned that as long as human greed and ambition festered in the hearts of those who exploited the earth, ancient curses like the Wendigo would never be banished forever, but merely forced into a temporary retreat. As dawn broke over the fractured horizon, a pale, hopeful light emerging slowly over a world scarred by conflict, the survivors found themselves faced with an ambiguous future. Had the polar bear's unity, bolstered by the fierce, unpredictable force of the werewolf, ensured a glimmer of hope and heralded the renewal of a broken ecosystem? Or had the dark, lingering curse of the Wendigo, though driven back this night, only been forced into a temporary slumber, a sleeping specter ready to rise again when the world's wounds reopened under renewed human avarice and environmental decay? The final scene under the rising sun was one of somber reflection. The polar bears, huddled together on fragile ice now slowly reconstituting itself, looked out over an endless expanse of water and scattered ice shards. Their survival was a testament to the undying spirit of the wild. A silent promise that nature, even when pushed to its limits, could muster strength against forces both supernatural and human. The werewolf, its features softening back into echoes of a lost humanity, disappeared into the distant folds of the tundra, leaving behind a haunting reminder of the curse that had once ruled the night. And so, beneath a sky that promised both renewal and the eternal vigilance of ancient forces, the saga of Polar Bear vs. Wendigo and Werewolf, Lycan, reached its final, ambiguous climax. In that uncertain moment, as the survivors gathered in quiet solidarity and the land began its slow, inexorable process of healing, the legacy of that fateful night was etched indelibly into the memory of the Arctic. The enduring lesson was clear. Nature's equilibrium is a delicate balance, forever endangered by human transgression, and the ancient curses born of our darkest impulses may one day rise again, heralded by the shadows of greed and the unyielding march of time. Under a sky bruised with the muted light of a receding sun, the shattered landscape of the far north lay in a state of forlorn limbo. The ice, once a symbol of eternal strength, now trembled on the verge of dissolution, a fragile veneer barely holding back the encroaching warmth of a climate undone. In this barren realm, where the ghosts of drowned cities whispered through fog and the wind carried broken memories, the survivors of a once vibrant species remained. A meager band of polar bears and a handful of indomitable souls clinging to what little hope the future might yet offer. At the heart of this desolation stood a mobile research station, a testament to human ingenuity and desperation. Within its metal walls, scientists labored day and night to salvage and preserve the dwindling genetic legacy of the polar bear through frozen archives, embryos suspended in time. A last effort to recapture what nature had nearly lost. Their hopes, however, were shadowed by a horror that refused to die, the Wendigo. Born of ancient myth and nourished by the despair of a collapsed civilization, this cursed entity had long haunted the fringes of humanity's ruined dominion. Its essence, a malignant force, had seeped into the scars of the dying world, reawakening with a terrible hunger for that which remained. In the final hours before a new, uncertain dawn, the researchers observed with mounting dread that the last wild polar bears, gaunt, wandering figures roaming on isolated patches of ice, were not the only survivors. From the dark, wind-battered forest surrounding the station, the Wendigo emerged, its gaunt form, mottled by a sickly, spectral pallor, advanced with slow, deliberate malice, seeking to claim every spark of life and extinguish what future could be reawakened. As it slithered across melting ice floes, its footsteps etching vicious scars upon the fragile surface, the creature embodied the eternal, corrosive hunger of a time when human greed and environmental neglect had unmade the natural order. The inevitable confrontation began on a precarious stretch of thinning ice along the station's edge. Amid the chaotic interplay of modern technology and nature's raw, untamed spirit, a solitary polar bear, marked by a tracking chip and revered as a living symbol of a vanished era, strode forward. Emaciated yet unbowed, it carried the memory of countless generations in its tired eyes. The research team had pinned their last hope on this creature, releasing it in a final gambit to act as a guardian against the advancing darkness. Now, on the edge of oblivion, the bear faced the Wendigo in a showdown that would decide the fate of all who remained. The ice beneath them groaned as the two forces collided. The Wendigo, a spectral being with eyes aflame with unholy hunger, lunged toward the bear with unnatural agility. Its claws, etched with the malevolence of an ancient curse, slashed at the air. In response, the polar bear unleashed a primal roar, a sound that carried the defiant strength of ice and winter, echoing across the empty expanse as if calling forth the spirits of its forebears. The bear's massive paws came down with measured fury, each blow shaking the delicate ice, as it fought not only for its own survival but for the rebirth of a world on the brink of total collapse. For long, the confrontation unfolded like a timeless ballet of destruction and hope. The Wendigo's every move was met with the bear's fierce resilience. The creature's spectral form flitted and twisted as it struggled to maintain its stolen power, a power born of human corruption and the ceaseless hunger of despair. The polar bear, though visibly weakened by years of hardship and isolation, drew on a deep, ancestral memory. In one earth-shaking moment, it charged with such force that the ice beneath them shuddered, and cracks snaked outward like scars upon a frozen heart. As the battle raged, the researchers watched in muted horror and awe from behind shattered observation windows. Their instruments fell silent in the face of the primal spectacle, and time itself seemed to pause as the two adversaries clashed. The polar bear's roar, a testament to nature's last, defiant heartbeat, resonated throughout the desolate plain. The Wendigo, wounded and staggered by the combined might of the creature's ancient power and the indomitable will to survive, let out a final, ragged cry, a sound both mournful and vengeful that seemed to promise its eventual return. Then came the decisive moment, with the fragile ice trembling beneath the weight of fury and sorrow. The ground gave way in a cascading collapse. In a tumultuous surge, the ice fractured completely, and both combatants were swept away in a violent plunge into the icy, dark waters below. The polar bear's mighty form, propelled by one final burst of instinct, fought desperately against the crushing force of the frigid sea, while the Wendigo's malevolent figure dissolved into shreds of spectral mist, its fate drifting uncertainly in the churning abyss. In the immediate aftermath, a profound silence settled over the ravaged landscape. Survivors from the research station, huddled in the remnants of their once hopeful outpost, and scattered indigenous witnesses emerged slowly into the weak light of dawn. They surveyed the broken ice, now nothing more than a mosaic of shattered fragments and swirling memories of a catastrophic night. Among whispered conversations and tearful remembrances, a heavy, lingering question permeated the cold air. Had the polar bear's indomitable courage and the fierce unity of nature triumphed? Or had the cursed Wendigo merely retreated into a dormant state, waiting for humanity's endless hunger to awaken it once more? Indigenous elders, their voices rich with the sorrow of lost generations and the wisdom of ancient lore, gathered in solemn ceremony around the crumbling remains of the research station. They spoke of the eternal balance, a delicate harmony forged over millennia that was now imperiled by the ceaseless greed of a dying civilization. Their warnings echoed like a final benediction. As long as the human heart harbored the seeds of exploitation, the spectral curses of the past would never truly die, but would circle the frozen wilds like restless phantoms. As the first tentative rays of a new day spilled over the horizon, a pale, yet hopeful light glistening on the wreckage of shattered ice and broken dreams, the survivors set forth to rebuild what they could of a world that had been scarred by relentless ambition and ancient malediction. The polar bear, though unseen beneath the tumultuous waves, had left an enduring legacy, a symbol of a nature that, even when battered by the forces of decay and despair, clings stubbornly to the promise of renewal. And the haunting memory of that fateful confrontation, where love, life, and the cursed remnants of human sin met in a crucible of ice and water, remained etched into the collective consciousness as an eternal warning. In that suspended moment between night and the uncertain dawn, the legacy of polar bear and Wendigo, frozen memories in a post-apocalyptic future, was sealed, a vivid, haunting reminder that the balance of nature, fragile and eternal, demands respect and remembrance. Whether the cursed Wendigo would rise anew from the darkness or remain locked away in the deep unknown, the message was clear. Even in the most desolate times, the wild, untamed spirit of the earth endures, a beacon of hope for those willing to heed its ancient call.